sijinani yatha vihaya navani grinnati naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jinani anyani sanyati navani dehi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good evening, everyone. That mantra is from the Bhagavad Gita, if any of you recognized it. 2.22, chapter 2, verse 22. One of the most famous verses in the Gita. Krishna uses a beautiful metaphor. He likens the human body to a set of clothes that we wear in the course of the day and that we cast off at the end of a day, right? Throw it in the hamper, put on a new set of clothes. And Krishna says, just as at the end of a long day, we cast off a set of clothes and put on a new one, the embodied soul casts off one human body and then takes on another one. So this verse, 2.22 of the Bhagavad Gita, embodies, expresses the Hindu doctrine of rebirth or reincarnation, which is the theme of today's interactive session. It's an intriguing topic. It's kind of fascinating. And a Pew study was done a few years ago, just recently, and surveying the general American population and asking, one of the questions asked was, do you believe in rebirth? Do you believe that you were here previously? Astonishingly, about a third of Americans believe in rebirth. And why is that such a startling figure? It's because it's not the case that there are a third of people in the US who are Hindus and Buddhists and Jainas and Sikhs. You know, it means that there are a lot of Christians and, you know, people who are atheist or agnostic who also seem to believe in rebirth somehow intuitively. So that's quite interesting. You don't have to be a card-carrying Hindu or a Buddhist and so on to believe in rebirth. There's something intuitively very plausible about it, very appealing about it. Okay. And part of what I'd like to discuss with you today is, first of all, just, you know, do you find it attractive as a doctrine, or do you lean toward the one life only paradigm? And if so, why? We can talk about that. So few things. So first of all, in Hinduism, the doctrine of rebirth is linked to another doctrine. So they're kind of twin doctrines, karma. Okay, so karma and rebirth go hand in hand. I recently published a book called Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism. And if you're interested, it's going to go open access at some point. And I already have a PDF, so if you want it, I can just send you the PDF if you want. So I'll be speaking about some of those things that I talk about in the book. Now, there are a lot of issues that I can talk about. I'm only going to touch on a few of them. And I'd also like to hear from you what interests you. Okay, what is urgent to you with regard to this topic? So one of the questions that often comes up the moment that you say, I believe in rebirth, is one of the obvious questions is, well, who or what exactly is reborn? What is the entity that assumes new bodies? Does anyone have any thoughts about this?
Soul.
The soul. Good. Yeah. So the Sanskrit term for the soul would probably be, can I use the word?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, except for the mic. Okay, well, I can put this in my pocket, right? Safely. Yeah. Okay, there we go. The Sanskrit word for soul would be Jivatma. This is the individual soul. Okay. Now, the thing about this soul, it's non-physical. It's also eternal. Okay. But by itself, it doesn't have memories of what it's done in the past. So this Jivatma, this soul, needs to be combined with something else. Okay? Namely, the subtle body. I'm giving you the Vedantic view. And there are other traditions within Hinduism. I'm giving you the Vedantic view. So the view of the Bhagavad Gita, for instance. So the reincarnating entity, according to Vedanta, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is the Jivatma in association with the subtle body. Why? First of all, what is the subtle body? The subtle body is, in simple English, the mind, actually. The mind, which is the repository of all our memories of what we've done in all our past lives. We don't have memories of what we did in our past lives, conscious memories, but they're stored in the form of samskaras, latent mental impressions, okay? So the mind has latent mental impressions of everything we've done in all of our past lives. These are called samskaras. Okay? And so it's the Jivatma in association with the subtle body that reincarnates from birth to birth. So we do this kind of a thing. This is the reincarnating entity. Okay? Now, another question that comes up. What determines when we're reborn, how we are reborn, under what circumstances we were reborn, what kind of body we assume in our next birth, what kind of bodies we assume in our previous births. And in Hinduism, it need not be a human body. Because this Jivatma can inhabit the bodies of non-human animals, dogs, cats, cows, insects, and even plants. In most schools of Hinduism, they believe also that plants also have souls, okay? So then there's another question. What determines the circumstances of my next birth? Let's say this is what I am in this birth. In the next birth, how do I know I'm not going to end up as a cow or something? Or as a geranium? What determines it? That's why this doctrine of rebirth goes hand in hand with the doctrine of karma. Okay? What is the doctrine of karma? Now, I don't want to go into all the complexities here. I'll say it very simply. We reap what we sow. This is the fundamental tenet of karma. Okay? We reap what we sow. Now, put a little bit more technically, here's the formula. I do a good action. And the Sanskrit term is, there are different terms, but one of the main ones is dharmika. I do something dharmika. What does that lead to? It generates what's called punya. Punya is karmic merit. And because of this punya, in the future, I will experience favorable, something positive in the future, basically, okay? So positive future circumstances. And exactly the opposite is also true. And is it still going to be caught on the camera if I put it here? Okay. So now, a bad action, an unethical action, something selfish, adharmika. This generates papa, karmic demerit. And then ultimately resulting in unfavorable or negative future circumstances. And when I say future circumstances, they could be later in this lifetime, or it could be a subsequent lifetime, okay? So that in a nutshell is a doctrine of karma. There's more to it, but I want to focus more on rebirth today. But one crucial thing that I want to emphasize here is, even among many Hindus, those who say, I believe in karma and rebirth, when they're asked, well, what exactly is the doctrine of karma? They usually explain it in terms of the retributive theory. So this is they understand karma as a retributive doctrine. Retribution means punishment. So they treat it as a doctrine of reward and punishment. I do something good, God rewards me for, or the law of karma rewards me for it. I do something bad, I get punished for it. Okay? This is the most common way that the doctrine of karma is understood, but less well known, but I think more powerful from a spiritual standpoint, is what's called an evolutionary doctrine of karma. According to the evolutionary doctrine of karma, the purpose of karma is not to reward or punish us, but to foster our moral and spiritual evolution. Okay? So what's the idea? The idea is simple, actually. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? If you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? Yeah, it will burn, right? I do something bad, I'm going to have to reap the consequences. Then what happens as a result? I know in the future, I better not do that, right? That's how we learn. That's how we grow. So this to me is, from a spiritual standpoint, I think a more fruitful way of thinking about the workings of karma. Otherwise, we're going to be living in fear, and we become a kind of spiritual hedonist. We only do good things for the positive benefits, you know? So it's like, what do I get out of? So instead of that, let's think about life as a spiritual journey culminating in liberation, God realization or self-realization. And the law of karma, this doctrine of karma, understood as an evolutionary doctrine, helps us to evolve morally and spiritually. That's the idea, okay? So that's all I want to say about the doctrine of karma. Now, another thing, is it possible, I get this question a lot when I talk about karma and rebirth, is it possible to regress from a human birth to a non-human animal birth? Or say I'm Swami Medhananda in this birth, could I be a tree, like a eucalyptus, or a cockroach in my next birth? This is a common question, right? In fact, some of you have seen the show The Big Bang Theory, right? So Rajesh Kutrapali is the Indian character on the show. And there's an episode where Leonard, who's got a crush on Penny, but is too much of a coward to tell her that. And so she's dating somebody else. And Leonard tries to sabotage Penny's date with that guy because he's jealous, right? And then he gets his conscience pricks him and he feels bad about it. And then Rajesh, the Hindu character, says, of course you feel bad. You messed up your karma, dude. You sabotaged Penny's date, and now you're going to be born as a banana slug in your next life. This is a very common, what goes around comes around. And then he explains the retributive karma idea, okay? But as I said, that's more of I don't want to say it's a caricature. That is one understanding of karma within Hinduism, and it's a common one. But I would suggest that this is a more rational and more spiritually beneficial way of thinking about the law of karma. And who are some of the people who teach the evolutionary doctrine of karma? I'll mention a couple figures here. Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda used to say that this world is a moral gymnasium in which we have come to build our muscles and grow strong. Not literal physical muscles, but becoming stronger as individuals. And then Sri Aurobindo, who was influenced by both of these figures. So these three, okay? And there are others, but these are three of the main ones. Okay, so now one of these questions, is it possible to regress? Interestingly, within Hinduism, there are different answers to this question. Okay, so there's no one answer. And even within a particular tradition, you'll find discrepancies. Okay, so for instance, Swami Vivekananda, when he was asked this question, he gives a point blank answer. The answer is yes, it is possible. And he says it very simply. If you behave like a beast, you might be reborn as a beast. If your behavior is like that of a non-human animal, then chances are good that you'll be reborn in that form, okay? But then there are others. I'll give it another example. Swami Abhedananda, he's a much less well-known figure. Some of you probably have never even heard of him. Abhedananda. Both Swami Vivekananda and Abhedananda are disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, okay, who lived from 1836 to 1886. But Abhedananda outright denies that it's possible to regress from a human birth to a non-human animal birth or to birth as a plant. He says it's not possible. And there's some people who just can't wrap their heads around this idea that if we're born as a human, then why should we regress? And so there are different views on this. Which one are any of you, do you have any strong feelings about this? Is it very disturbing that it's possible that it might be possible for us to be reborn as a non-human animal or as a plant? Yeah.
There are ways to like choose, like, you know, let's say I go and I'm like, I want to be a panther.
You pick and choose which animal. Mm-hmm. So this is a good question, actually. There's a deep question behind that, which is, it's not just about whether we regress or whatever, but to what extent does the individual soul have a say in the circumstances of its next birth? I think that's an important question. Again, within Hinduism, there are different views if you go really deep into the weeds. Sri Aurobindo, for instance, says that the more spiritually evolved the soul, the more say it has. Okay. And a very spiritually evolved soul will essentially cooperate with God in determining, here's what I need, what I think will be best for me to grow spiritually. Mm-hmm.
Are there other beings in Hinduism considered to be above humans, but like not obviously not God realized or self-realized, but in that realm in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are beings like devas, D-E-V-A. These are kind of celestial beings. The question of whether they're higher than humans is a little bit, I don't think, see, the beauty of being a human, it's not always fun. It's always going to be a mixture of pleasure and pain, but it's only as a human on Earth, here on Earth, which is a mixture of good and bad things, that we're able to grow morally and spiritually. Okay, these other realms are either temporary heavens, where if I do a lot of good actions, I have a lot of punya. As a result, I go to a temporary heaven to exhaust my good karma. And what do people do? What do these beings do in these heavens? They have a really nice time. It's all very positive, all very pleasant, but it doesn't last. It doesn't last forever. Okay? And so eventually I have to come back to the earth. And the other thing about these, Sri Aurobindo calls them typal worlds, T-Y-P-A-L. These are worlds that are extremely positive, but we can't make growth. We can't grow morally or spiritually in these realms. That's just not the nature of these realms. It's only on Earth that we can. So even though the human experience is more mixed, it's arguably, from a spiritual standpoint, a better condition to be in. Okay, and then there are also temporary hells, narakas. And there are also these kind of negative beings, the opposites of the devas, and asuras and these kinds of things. If we do a lot of bad actions, where did that go? Up there. And so we've accumulated a lot of papa. That papa will result in us being reborn into unfavorable future circumstances in the next human birth or whatever. It might not even be human. But in between, you're asking about the in between, we might go to a temporary hell. And it's fortunately temporary. It's not going to be eternal for most traditions. And you exhaust your bad karma by undergoing some pretty negative experiences in those temporary hells. And then you come back to this earth in either a human body or a non-human animal body or a plant. But again, as I said, there's a diversity of views there on that question. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So my first question is, when you reincarnate, doesn't necessarily mean like you're going into the future, like you're going into like the next timeline wise. And then I guess like my other question is, why is it considered regressing to be reincarnated as an animal?
Right. Okay. So the first question is about this time issue. Okay, maybe the language of regression is a little confusing. So I don't mean that you're going back in time or something. The idea is just regression in the sense of, in Hinduism, the human birth is considered the best kind of birth. And you might think, well, why? Isn't that speciesist? There's a term called speciesism, where you're privileging one species over the others. And that has been the result, the root of a lot of exploitation, for instance, and ecological devastation. The Orthodox Christian view is that only human beings have souls. So dogs and cats don't have souls, plants don't have souls. And so as a result, what happens? People feel that they have every right to exploit nature, right? And to eat animals and whatever. So Hinduism believes that plants also have souls, all animals have souls, insects have souls, and so on. Okay. Now, then you might ask, well, then why is it a regression at all? The idea is that some of you have pets, right? Whether they're dogs or cats or whatever. And I'd be interested in your answers, actually. I was about to ask a rhetorical question, but maybe this is a serious question. Can non-human animals grow morally and spiritually? What do you think? No, I mean, you don't really, I mean, that's the intuitive answer, is to say, no, what kind of, and are they morally responsible for their actions? Right? I mean, there are all sorts of things that happen in nature, in the wild, like murder and rape and what, but you wouldn't call it that, right? Because they're animals that don't have a moral conscience and they don't, right? They're just kind of, they operate on instinct. So it's only as a human being that we take moral responsibility for our actions, and that we can grow more, we can learn from our mistakes, we can correct our course, for instance, and then make progress toward the goal of spiritual liberation. That's the idea. Okay. And so then you might ask, well, what's the point in being reborn as a non-human animal or as a plant? The point would be because you have a certain amount of karma, maybe a mixture of good and bad karma, but mostly bad probably. And then by dint of being born as a cat, and by the way, being born as a cat, you could be born as a cat in Buckingham Palace, or you could be born as a cat in Mumbai as a in the gutter. So not all cats are born equal. Okay, that's another thing to keep in mind. So that's all karmic. Okay, you can have a very fancy cat life and you can have a miserable cat life, and so on. And then there's also being born as a human. That's yay, but then what are your circumstances? You might be born into a broken family and so on. You might be an orphan. There are all sorts of challenges that you could face. You could be born with a silver spoon in your mouth. All of this is karmically determined, okay? But the basic idea is birth as a human being is the best from a spiritual standpoint. That's the idea. Does that make sense? Good question. Yeah.
I know this is not totally related to the talk today, which is reincarnation, but I guess like who is like the arbiter, or what is like the criteria for good and bad actions? And wouldn't that evolve over time, meaning that what is considered most considered good and bad like 1,000 years ago, obviously would change now. So like how it's like God adjusting for that when you go.
No, that's a very good question. Yeah. There's this whole, in philosophy, there's this concept of moral relativism, which is I think what you're getting at, which is that different cultures may have different standards of morality. And Swami Medhananda pointed this out. He said as he visited different countries, he found that I think he visited Tibet or something, and where one woman will have multiple husbands, and that's polyandry, right? I think it's what it's called. And that's completely normal there. But in the US or in other places, that might be considered extremely immoral or just weird, right? And so to some extent, there are differences in that way. But is there a common denominator across the board for actions that are good versus actions that are bad? And Vedanta will say yes. And the Vedantic explanation is just a good action is an unselfish action. Okay. And a bad action is a selfish action. And there are some very obvious examples, right? So usually we do bad things when we're acting out of self-interest, when we're acting out of selfishness, right? I want something for myself, even at the expense of another person's happiness or whatever. So I steal something from another person, or and so on and so forth. And good actions, like in the Bhagavad Gita, things like exercising compassion, serving others, helping out people when they're in need, engaging in spiritual practices, and so on and so forth. Okay, so overall, but then you might say, well, what counts as selfish and unselfish might vary. And there is some variation, but I think that at bottom, the conscience, I mean, I think this is studied in anthropology, maybe moral anthropology, but the question of, is the conscience itself something that's culturally relative? I'm not sure. The experience of conscience, I feel like that if somebody strikes another person, a person who's completely innocent, I mean, even if you're in, an African village, or if you're in high class American society or whatever, I think that the conscience is going to prick you in the same way, probably. Okay, that's also a good question. But coming back to the question, which nobody actually gave me a direct answer to. Maybe let me put it more starkly. Okay, imagine that it is possible to be reborn as a non-human animal or as a plant. Is that scary, or is it just fine? Are you fine with that? Or are you neutral? Yeah.
I think it's fitting.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
And I you said are non-human animals capable of growth?
Mm-hmm.
Are they capable?
Mm-hmm.
I think they are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like or they're capable of like feeling. Like if a dog bites you, right?
Mm-hmm.
A trained dog bites
Mm-hmm.
you, it tends to feel bad. It tends to not do it again. A dog can learn thing A or thing B. A or thing B.
Mm-hmm.
So if like we're reborn based on our karma, if we really have so much negative karma, I think it's like almost better for us to start at a point of a dog, learn what the dog can learn, and then learn what the next step can learn, so on and so forth. But I also think like something that I was thinking about that you said a while ago. You said there's a cat in Buckingham Palace, where cat in the gutter in the and I thought about that a little bit, like between now and like I'm not sure like exactly I feel like it doesn't make sense because like when you see humans typically, or like it seems to be, those in the most power, those with the silver spoon tend to be the most evil. Like, they're the least, or they tend to be able to empathize the least. Probably the cat living in Buckingham Palace can empathize a lot less than in the Mumbai. So why could you say that cat in like a previous life as a fly or whatever? I don't know, like that.
But why consider those positive circumstances? Basically, is what you're saying. I mean, in a certain way, it could be
like
worse.
What is the positive?
No, I think that's a great point. And actually, Sri Aurobindo makes this point explicitly as a critique of the retributive approach to karma. And he says, look, it's a very crude kind of thinking, a crude kind of calculus to think that I do bad things and then I'm born into a poor family in my next birth. He says, on the contrary, the soul of a king, after the life of the king, will look back and say, okay, now I know what worldly enjoyment is because I've reached the heights of worldly enjoyment. In my next birth, and let's say that the king did a lot of good things also for his subjects and he was not immoral and whatever. He chooses to be born as a pauper in his next birth because he feels that that's the way forward in terms of his spiritual growth, right? And so I really think that we often learn more through our suffering than through our experiences of pleasure. Swami Medhananda used to say, suffering is a great eye-opener. I think that's really true. We often find that to be the case. So I think that's a great point. It is interesting. Some of the things you're saying is quite interesting. I think it is controversial, like claiming that when a dog bites someone, it's possible that some dogs will, you use the language, I think, of feeling bad.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I'm not sure that everybody would agree with that. I mean, it's possible that when a dog bites a human being, let's say, and the dog gets punished as a result, it might be that out of fear of punishment, it's not going to bite again, but that's not exactly feeling bad, right? So I think it's complex. I mean, I don't think it's obvious that a dog is capable.
Dog owners would disagree with you.
That you mean that? Wait, so are you going with him or with me on this?
I'm with you.
Oh, okay. So you think that dogs actually will feel bad? Well, just because dog owners believe it doesn't make it true. So anyway, I'm just saying I think it's open to question, but it's a very interesting point you made. Yeah.
Like my personal opinion on that is that like there's like levels to being aware of your actions or whatever as an animal. Like, for example, like dolphins and like monkeys and stuff like that have a
Mhm.
higher level of like
Yeah.
awareness of themselves.
Yeah.
You know, a fly would. So
Mhm.
it's like there's like stages to
There are degrees.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
degrees to
sure.
it. Obviously, I don't think but being a human being gives you the most choice in
Yeah.
actions.
Right.
Yes.
And it's a kind of scale or something. And these issues are, you might be surprising to learn this, but these have been discussed by Hindu thinkers centuries ago. So for instance, they explain in the Manusmriti. Manusmriti is one of these texts that strongly urges vegetarianism. You shouldn't eat animals. And some of the commentators, like Medhatiti, what they say is, they'll raise an objection. One objection is, well, wait a minute, but plants themselves have souls. And so how is being vegetarian any better? Because you're still eating plants, right? And that also involves the death of these plants. And his answer is, he brings in the framework of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And he says that human beings have a preponderance of sattva compared to the non-human animals and plants, okay? And as a result, human beings are most sensitive to pain and suffering because it's not just physical pain, but also mental pain. And so it's kind of a combination of both. And then as you go down the scale, so cats and dogs, of course they feel pain. There's no question that they feel pain. And so we still have a moral obligation not to eat them. Not just dogs and cats, but even cows and chickens and whatever. That's the argument. But then when you get down to plants, because of the predominance of tamas, the third, the lowest of the three gunas, they're less sensitive to pain. Notice I say less, not that they're, but you'll even find there are new studies coming out about how plants themselves show a certain kind of sensitivity to different kinds of stimuli, positive, negative. So there's still a sensitivity, but it's much less to a lower degree. And so that justifies the eating of plants. But if you go really far in this direction, Jainism, if you're a hardcore Jaina monk, you won't eat, potatoes and stuff because that also involves injury to plants, and they don't believe in that. And so they'll tend to eat only the fruit that kind of spontaneously falls from trees, for instance, things that don't involve any killing at all, even the plant. Okay. I wanted to cover a couple more important things. Number one, what are some of the main arguments in support of rebirth? Okay. Is it just a dogma that we believe on faith or because the scripture tells us, or are there good arguments for it? So I have a whole chapter on this if you're interested. And as I said, I can share the PDF with Vedanta, then you can share it maybe.
No, I think.
But you already have it? Okay, cool. Oh, good. Okay, so it's already there. There you go. But chapter 3 discusses arguments for karma and rebirth. Or wait, what is it? Yeah, arguments in support of karma and rebirth. And then chapter 4 is arguments against karma and rebirth. And I just want to give a taste of a couple of arguments for and a couple of arguments against. So arguments for, one of them, which is very striking, it seems to me, and very relevant these days, is the fact that more and more kids, young kids, age 2, 3, 4, usually not much older than that, just report having memories of their past life. And it's very intriguing. Now, this has been the case in countries like India for Lord knows how long, forever. Okay. But I mean, partly it's expected in a way because the whole culture is saturated with the doctrines of karma and rebirth. Okay. But secondly, even though a lot of kids talk about it, they weren't rigorously kind of tested and researched and verified. Okay. In most of the time, there's some exceptions. There's a woman, I think her name was Shanti Devi. This is a big case in the early 20th century, I believe, of somebody, this woman who's claiming, giving all these facts about her previous life, which they then verified. They went to her old village, the village she claimed to have lived in her previous life, and all the details she was talking about all matched, So there are some cases of that, but in general, they're not rigorously verified. But what's happened more recently is there are two researchers, one who's now dead. His name is Ian Stevenson. He was a real pioneer in reincarnation research, and he's published lots of books and scientific studies on all these fascinating cases of very, very young kids just saying, hey, I was so-and-so in my past birth, born in this place, my wife was named this, and I did this as my occupation, and blah, blah. And they looked them up, these claims, and they found that those reported statements tallied with the facts. And that's a very interesting and growing body of evidence. And so I'll mention one example. There's a kid named James Leininger, who's now an adult, but at the time he was 2 years old, and he kept having these recurring nightmares of being a pilot on a plane and the plane crashing. And so he would have these nightmares where he'd be shouting in the middle of the night, Mayday, Mayday, plane on fire, plane crashing, that kind of stuff. And his parents just kind of chalked it up to, Lord knows, maybe watching a TV show or something, so they just kind of ignored him. But they kept coming back, these nightmares. And then one day they asked him about these nightmares, and he said, he just started saying, oh, yeah, I was a World War II fighter. I don't know if he said World War II. I can give the fact. I mentioned the exact facts here. One second. Okay. He says, he'd say things like airplane crash on fire. Oh, and he told his parents that he was in his previous life a World War II fighter pilot whose name was James and whose plane was shot down by the Japanese. That his aircraft carrier was called Natoma. He used that specific word, Natoma, Natoma. And that he had a friend named Jack Larson. His father, Bruce, later verified all of these claims, finding that they corresponded to James Houston, a fighter pilot killed in the Battle of Iwo Jima during World War II, whose plane took off from an aircraft carrier called the USS Natoma Bay. So really striking evidence. And his father also verified that Jack Larson was another pilot based at USS Natoma Bay. And so this researcher, his name is Jim Tucker. He's done a lot of research on cases that take place in America primarily, which is even more interesting in a way, because these are kids who are typically not raised in families that believe in rebirth, but they just spontaneously start talking about having memories of their past lives. So it's really fascinating. Okay, there's another really interesting example. There's this term. This is one of these fancy terms that you can impress your friends with. The term is, I'll put in a different color. Let's see if any of you know what the term means. Xenoglossy. Does anyone know what this means? You can guess it etymologically. Glossia means language. Xeno, like xenophobia, means other, or like a foreigner, right? The foreign, it's the ability to speak a language that you've never learned. It sounds really weird. How can you speak a language that you've never learned? But there's a case I mentioned in this book. And this is research by Ian Stevenson. Okay. An Indian woman named Uttara Huddar, Huddar, 1941 to 2018. She died recently. Who was born and raised in Maharashtra. So what was her local language? Marathi. At the age of 32, a new personality took over. And she started to identify as Sharada. She called herself Sharada. An early 19th century Bengali woman she claimed to have been in her previous birth. As Sharada, she was not able to recognize Uttara's parents or friends. She recalled various details from her previous birth, including the names of her numerous family members from her past life that were verified by Stevenson. And she did not even seem to know or understand Marathi, which is her mother tongue in this birth. People are speaking to her Marathi, she wouldn't even understand what they were saying. She couldn't understand Marathi, Hindi, or English. But all of those languages were known to Uttara in this lifetime. But she did speak and converse in typically early 19th century Bengali. She could speak in fluent Old Bengali, which a language she never learned, Uttara never learned, with native fluency and accuracy. And so the conclusion that Stevenson draws is that she actually was, this woman Uttara, this Marathi woman Uttara, was the 19th century woman Sharada in her past life. Okay, so there's some really interesting cases of these. I encourage you, if you're interested, to look at a book by Jim Tucker called Before, Children's Memories of Past Lives, for more of these really fascinating cases. Okay, so that's one source of evidence. Another argument, before we move on to arguments against and how we can answer those, respond to those arguments, it's what's called, or what I call, the argument from latent mental impressions. Remember what I said earlier, the subtle body, right? The reincarnating entity is the soul in association with the mind. And the mind is the repository of innumerable samskaras, latent mental impressions of what we've done in all of our past lives. So what does that mean? It means in principle, every single one of us could regain memories of our past lives because it's all stored up here. And there are certain texts in Indian spiritual traditions which explain the technique by which we can regain memories of our past lives. Okay? And so one of those texts is Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Some of you might have read that text or at least familiar with the name. 3.18, if you want to look it up. 3.18 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra goes, Samskara Sakshat Karanat Purva Jati Jnanam, which means by concentrating intensely on your past life samskaras, which are stored in the unconscious, you can regain your memories of your past lives. Okay? And Swami Medhananda talks about this. He says, each experience that we have comes in the form of a wave in the chitta, the mind. And this subsides and becomes finer and finer, but is never lost. It remains there in minute form. And if we can bring this wave up again, it becomes memory. So if the yogi can make a sanyama, S-A-M-Y-A-M-M-A, sanyama, which just means a kind of concentration, a method of concentration. If the yogi can make a sanyama on these past impressions in the mind, he will begin to remember all his past lives. So it's a technique which you can try. It's not that easy to learn the technique, but in principle, it's possible. And there are many who claim that they have regained memories of their past lives through this technique. And there are others, like Sri Ramakrishna and there are other great mystics, who can just look at you and know what you were in your past life, what you will be in your future life if you're going to be reborn. And that seems to be more of a mystical insight. They don't even have to meditate on your samskaras and this and that, but that's a kind of a mystical mode. So that's a kind of independent argument. There are mystics who claim to have knowledge of their own past lives just through mystical insight and knowledge of other people's past lives. Many great gurus, when somebody comes who becomes their disciple, before they take them on as their disciple, they read their minds and they just know. Swami Vivekananda could tell. He's like, oh, you were so-and-so. Holy Mother Sharada Devi, the wife of Sri Ramakrishna. She would give a mantra based on the god or goddess that the person worshipped in their past life. Oh, you love Ganesha, so I'm giving you the Ganesha mantra, that kind of thing. That's another source of evidence. Okay. Now, on the side of arguments against rebirth, there are some very intuitive ones. And I want to mention a couple, and then how might Hindus respond to those arguments? So one, it's called the population explosion objection. I've heard this a lot. The idea is the human population has been increasing almost exponentially. I mean, if you're very technical about it, it may not be exactly exponential, but very, very rapidly. In the past few decades, past few centuries, like that. If you just look at the human population, how much it's grown, it's extraordinary. So now the question is, where the heck are all these souls coming from? Because every one of these human bodies has to have a soul. Where are they coming from, right? So the standard Hindu response is twofold. Number one, remember that souls inhabit not only human bodies, but also non-human animal bodies and plants. So that's part of the answer. And Swami Medhananda actually says in one place, in one of his lectures, he says, as the human population increases, the non-human animal population is decreasing. The souls of those non-human animals are becoming human beings. So, I mean, I don't know if he did it like a rigorous scientific investigation, but in principle, you can understand the logic. And then there's a second part to the answer, the Hindu response, which is this earth is not the only realm in which there are souls. Remember your question? There are also these intermediate realms. There are temporary hells, there are temporary heavens, and souls reside temporarily in those. And there's movement between these different, what are called lokas, L-O-K-A-S, lokas. This earth is the bhu-loka, but there's so many lokas above, so many lokas below, and there are souls in these different lokas. The sum total of all the souls in all of the lokas and in all the human, non-human animal, and plant bodies is constant. And there's just a kind of exchange of what kind of body the soul is inhabiting and in what loka the soul is residing. You following? Okay. Another very intuitive objection. Well, if rebirth is true, why don't we have memories of our past lives? Very intuitive, right? If I lived in the past, why don't I remember what I was in my past. Now, one response is, well, that some kids do have these memories. They claim to, like James Leininger. But they're very, very rare, these cases. 0.001%. Okay, so why? Why don't most of us, why don't all of us have memories of past lives? It's also a very important question. So again, Hindus have pretty plausible response to this question. Number one, just because we don't have memory of something doesn't mean that we didn't exist at that time. So for instance, one simple way to understand this is, how many of you remember what you were doing when you were 3 weeks old? We were all 3 weeks old once, every single one of us in this room. 3-week-old babies, but none of us remember what we were doing. Right? It would be funny if one of you did. I got that once when I asked this in a lecture once in the Hollywood Temple, and one was like, "What do you say to that?" So, anyways, okay. So anyway, but presumably most people don't have memory. Does it mean that we didn't exist? No, we did. We know that we existed, right? It's just that we don't remember anything from that time. Our parents can tell us that we existed, right? They were the ones who were up at night feeding us and whatever. Okay, so that's one line of argument. But the second line of argument is, I think, even more powerful, which is, remember, this world is governed by God, according to Hinduism. God, in his infinite wisdom, has withheld from us memories of our past lives so as to foster our moral and spiritual progress. Because just imagine, in one lifetime, how many stupid things we can do, right? Imagine if we were saddled with the memories of all the dumb things that we've done in all our past lives. Just imagine. We'd become basket cases. How would we, I was like, oh my God, I did that, I was that. It would be crazy. So the idea is that in his infinite wisdom, God has withheld from us memories of what we did in our past lives so that we can make a fresh start in this life. That's the idea. Okay? So God had good reasons for that. Now, does the system break down? Is there a glitch in the matrix sometimes? Yeah. Now, is there a reason for that? Well, maybe. If you think about it, what might be the divine purpose behind these James Leiningers and these Uttarahaddas? Maybe because in this very skeptical age where people are, they want rational proof for things, these few instances of people saying, I know what I was in my past birth and here's the evidence for it, lends rational credibility to the doctrines of karma and rebirth, and that to make it more likely to believe in these doctrines. And so there might be a divine purpose even behind those glitchy kind of exceptional cases. Okay. Yes.
I just have a question about like the case that you were mentioning where they remember like the woman in Maharashtra.
Yeah.
So what does that say about their moral and spiritual evolution? Because like restart from like kind of a fresh slate, so you relearn everything. But then what happens when you get sent back to this like mentality? And
yeah, no, it's a great question. And I was giving a version of this talk in Japan at Waseda University a couple of years ago, and there was a scholar who raised this kind of question, and then another scholar thankfully came to my rescue. He's this brilliant philosopher named Yujin Nagasawa. So he suggested, and I find this argument plausible, he said, well, look, it's because of her bad karma. But you can, I mean, if all of our negative and positive experiences are accounted for by karma, then that's also, if it's a negative, like James Leininger having nightmares at the age of 2 is not pleasant. Not like he's having fun, right? So it's a kind of trauma, I mean, in a certain way, but that also has karmic origins.
But if it's withheld from you, then how are you supposed to like evolve morally and spiritually? Because wouldn't you want the information from the past life to what you do in this life?
You guys are smart. You guys are coming up with all the fancy philosophers who are asking the same questions. So I talk about all this in the book, but so there's a guy named Whitley Kaufman. Okay, he's a professor at UMass, philosopher. And he had a debate about karma and rebirth with a few scholars who are defending the doctrines of karma and rebirth in an academic journal called Philosophy East and West. And it's a really interesting debate that took place about 15 years ago or something. And he raises this very objection. He says, look, okay, you Hindus are telling me that there's a good reason why we don't have memories of our past lives. And at the same time, karma tells us we reap what we sow. How is that fair? If I don't even know what I did in my past life to deserve the whatever negative experiences I'm having in this life. The answer is, Swami Medhananda gives an answer to this, which I find pretty cogent, but we can discuss that. It's up for grabs. His answer is, look, it's enough to know that I did something in my past life to deserve what's happening now. We don't need to know exactly what we did. Do you see what I mean? It's more about just the general knowledge. I did something to deserve this. I'm going to take responsibility for my present situation and try to move forward and grow as much as I can. Do you see what I mean? And there could be a good reason why God is withholding the specific knowledge of exactly what I did. But at the same time, just as a matter of fact, the doctrine of karma entails that we did something in our past in order to deserve the current circumstances. Okay. Good question. Yes. Yeah.
I have a quick question about, so the first rebuttal you said towards towards the concept of rebirth and everything, and how all of the plant and animal lives are potentially coming to the human form. And with the idea that the human form is the better form you can take with like the cycle, would you say that that's kind of evidence that we're leaning towards a more generally better, karmically better world? Would you say that that's the case, or does that have some caveats?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So is the world moving in a kind of spiritually positive direction? I think it's a great question. And within Hinduism, you get different views on this. Sri Aurobindo is one of the preeminent Hindu philosophers who, in great detail and with great elaboration, in a book called The Life Divine and in other works, he develops this doctrine of spiritual evolution. And he claims that there's nothing but divine consciousness, and that divine consciousness is latent in everything. But that in the course of this Earth's evolution, this latent divinity, this latent divine consciousness progressively manifests in higher and higher forms. And that right now, humanity has evolved to the point of mind, to the stage of mind. And most of us think, well, yeah, that's it. Evolution is more or less stopped at this point. There won't be a Superman in the future or something. But Sri Aurobindo says, actually, mind is itself an intermediate stage in the process of spiritual evolution, and that ultimately we're gonna evolve from mind to supermind, where divine consciousness will be fully manifest. Even now, it's not fully manifest, and that's why you see so many bad things happening throughout the world. Okay, so Sri Aurobindo sees the world in a very, very rosy light, and ultimately moving. He acknowledges all the bad stuff, but then says that's because we're in this intermediate stage of evolution. But that he gives sometimes hints at timeframes, but usually he's more cautious about it and says, look, I can't give you a precise figure, but at some point, humanity will evolve from mind to supermind, and at which point, this very earth will become a kind of kingdom of heaven, and then there won't even be any rebirth anymore. There's just going to be eternal divine beings living in this eternal realm, basically. But that's just one view among others, basically. Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my question is, how does that fit with like the because like we're in the worst human where like crimes will be horrific.
Yeah.
Will there is it because of the presence of a Kalki avatar or a divine being that restores that balance? Or?
Well, remember that Kali Yuga is going to be followed by the best of all ages, right? Satya Yuga. Yeah, I mean, these are long periods, and but it's almost like people in AA. I have friends that went through AA or whatever, and a lot of them say that they have to hit rock bottom before they see the light, and then they. So it's we're in Kali Yuga, which is very bad, but then at a certain point, it's going to revert to the best of all ages. That's if you believe this idea of the four yugas, these four ages, from best to worst, and supposedly we're now in Kali Yuga, which is the worst of all ages. I don't know what to say about to what extent I believe it. I don't disbelieve it necessarily. Every Hindu will throw out different figures for what these periods. Some people will actually say we're not in the Kali Yuga. I don't know if you know that, but
yeah.
So for instance, I didn't know that Sadhguru says that, but Yogananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda, his tradition also doesn't believe that we're currently in the Kali Yuga. I think he says Treta or something like that. There's some kind of something else. Anyway, so there's some dispute about exactly what age we're in now, but in general, many people think that we're in the Kali Yuga. But then there are also, like Swami Vivekananda said that with the advent of Ramakrishna, that the Satya Yuga has begun. These are all, and then there are different traditions will say different things about this. It gets kind of complicated. But yeah, I think you're right to point out the obvious fact that this world is full of evil and a lot of bad things, right? And people are doing really terrible things. Is it the case that people in general are becoming better? I don't think we can make those kinds of generalizations. I think different people are at different places. I think that's the more plausible position, and we have to be very nuanced and fine-grained about it. And yeah.
Well, I don't know, does the Vedas or something actually say that there are like these Vedas and stuff like that? Because personally, I don't believe in the
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I get it. Right.
Because as far as you look in history, in documented history, people have been worse in the past. There's no recorded period of time where people were all nice, all the kings were good and all the
Yeah. No, it's a very valid. Yeah.
So I think my personal thing is I think they made it that way so it's simple for people to understand, but actually it's more of a mental state of being.
Yeah. That's
being in the Satya Yoga where you are a good person, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's not like you have to believe in this stuff to be a Hindu. I think that would be very fanatical and fundamentalist in that. Now, the thing is, this whole idea of the yugas, you don't find it in any of the Upanishads. You don't find it in the Bhagavad Gita. You find it in some of the Puranas. Okay, and the Puranas are not considered to be, strictly speaking, the Vedic scriptures themselves. The Upanishads and Gita are Upanishads themselves are part of the Vedas. Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, but is so highly regarded and revered that it's considered to be one of the foundational scriptures of Vedanta, okay? And very much aligned with, put almost on a par with the Upanishads, okay? But the Puranas have a different status. Not because they're worse or something, but the idea is that it's full of all sorts of stuff. Lots of stories and mythologies and characters and, and these ideas like yugas and these other kinds of things, but it's not considered as authoritative as the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, which do talk about the yugas. And so if you don't believe in them, it doesn't matter. In fact, when I talk about Hinduism, I think I've given a talk here before. I had a class on Hinduism, the core doctrines of Hinduism, right? There, I explained the 4 core doctrines of Hinduism, none of which include karma and rebirth, and I did that on purpose. And then I say, there's what I call Hinduism plus, where I add 2 more doctrines, one of which is karma and rebirth, and another one of which is the original, note, I say original caste system. So not the one that we know, which is hereditary and the cause of all sorts of problems, but the original caste system, which is based on our innate qualities and our behavior. But I put karma and rebirth as an optional number 5, because you can be a perfectly good Hindu and not even believe in karma and rebirth. You don't want to. Okay. And let alone yugas and all these things. These are very secondary, within Hinduism. What are the 4 core doctrines? Let me run through them very quickly. Let's see how much you remember, actually. Speaking of memories. Number 1. Can anyone, what's the first one?
It's each of us are in.
That's 2. What's 1?
Oh yeah. It's polytheistic one.
Almost, yeah, very good. Polymorphic monism. Polymorphic monism. Morph means form. Poly means many. Monism means oneness, right? So there's one infinite divine, which manifests in countless forms. The one infinite divine manifests as Ganesha, as Kali, as Hanuman, as Rama, and Christ, and so on, okay? The beauty of this isn't polytheism. Polytheism means there are many gods and goddesses. That's not this view. There's only one God, but that one infinite God manifests in various forms. And so that's also not monotheism. Why? Monotheism means there's just one God, and that God is a personal God. And monism is broader than monotheism because this one infinite divine is impersonal and personal. So the one impersonal, personal, infinite divine manifests in countless forms. Okay, so this is one. Two is what Vedant said earlier, which is that each of us is intimately connected to this divine reality. Okay, we are intimately related to this infinite divine. And then three, the goal of life is to realize the divine and our relationship to the divine. And then number four, there are many paths to the same goal. And those many paths have been generalized by Vedanta into four main yogas. I hope you can. So Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, Karma Yoga, the path of selfless service, and Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. So by all these means and other modes, we can realize the divine, which is the goal of life. So those are the four core doctrines of Hinduism. If anybody asks you, see, Buddhism has these four noble truths. It's really cool. And you can put them, even a 5-year-old can understand what are you can just rattle off the four noble truths, right? Hinduism is so vast and so complex and bewildering, frankly, that it's hard to kind of put it in summary form. But this is pretty simple, to the point where I gave a talk on Hinduism a few months ago, and I told people, I said, hey, anyone out there, one of you should make business cards out of this and just put all the four core doctrines of Hinduism on a business card. And then she did. Within a week, she made like hundreds of these business cards and gave them to me. Did I promise I'd give them to you? Is that, or no? Or are we gonna, okay.
I have a different question.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
How do the Purusharthas kind of fit into this, the whole like
Mhm.
framework of this?
The whole scheme. Okay, the Purusharthas, and this could be a separate discussion actually, but the four Purusharthas, what are they, by the way? And we can wrap it up with this because it's already 8:35, but yeah, what are they? Yeah, very good. Okay, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Okay, these are the four main values in human life, Purusharthas, okay? They're called Purusharthas. The four, now I show it taller. Okay, now, dharma means ethical living, more or less. Okay, on that basis, on that foundation, it's legitimate to acquire material possessions and wealth. That's artha. It's also perfectly legitimate to fulfill your worldly desires. If you go to any Hindu temple, whether it's in California or in Mumbai or in Andhra Pradesh, if you take a microphone and you ask people, hey, what are you praying for? 98% of people will say, oh, I want a son. It's usually a son, unfortunately, rather than in India. Or oh, I want to raise, or oh, so on and so forth. These are worldly prayers, right? So they're either asking for wealth or they're asking for some fulfillment of some kind of desire, right? And that's okay too. But those aren't the highest values. The highest of all values is moksha, which is liberation. It's the highest value. And the idea is that our lives are a kind of spiritual journey. And even though it's perfectly legitimate to pursue all four of these values, we have to honor our own kind of evolution and not stall at just dharma or just artha and kama. So for instance, marriage, a Hindu marriage is considered to be extremely holy and sacred. Why? The idea is that you're vowing to be with this person, share your life with this other human being as spiritual partners, and yes, legitimately to fulfill your desires for artha and kama on a dharmic basis. So we cover those three values. But ultimately, the two of you, the husband and the wife, or the soon-to-be husband and wife, agree as Hindus that the highest goal is moksha and that you're actually helping each other
toward moksha. Now, how is that possible? Well, the idea is that even in the marriage should evolve. What's the first step in evolution in a marriage? Usually, for a lot of husbands and wives, it's having a kid. The moment you have a kid, immediately things change. Right before, it might be very romantic and you're spending so much time together, and then suddenly you got this kid and you're up all night, the kid's crying, you get 2 hours of sleep, and you've created this human being together. And suddenly, you're, instead of being face to face with each other, you're now both concentrated on this kid, and you mature and you grow. You know, I mean, there's so many things you learn from being a parent. Then the next step, the parents go to, I mean, the kids grow up, they go to college. So, but the idea is, if you're 80 years old and taking Viagra, it means you're not, this is not in accordance with the, no offense anyway, but the point is, that means that you're not moving past the kama to moksha. That's the idea, right? The marriage should evolve. Sri Ramakrishna used to tell householder devotees, after having 1 or 2 children, try to live with your spouse like brother and sister. Right? Just the principle of that is what's crucial to Hinduism. That's the idea behind the Purushartha framework. You can and you should legitimately fulfill your desires, but always keeping in mind the highest value in life, which is spirituality. That's the idea. So Sri Ramakrishna put this in his own simple, he always puts things in a simple way. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, imagine you keep writing 0 after 0. That number will have no value until you add a 1 to the front of it. That 1 is spirituality, God, moksha. Once you have a spiritual basis to life, you can have all those zeros, and all those zeros will take on value. But you need the 1 in front. Okay? All right, great. That was wonderful, guys. Thanks a lot. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.